Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us for another session of Why Marx. Tonight, we're discussing the war on terror, specifically around Guantanamo and the so-called prevent strategy. But this is, of course, a subject that affects more and more people as the campaign against Palestine and its supporters, solidarity movement, goes into total overdrive. And the definition of terrorism has been stretched even further and further, with now Tony Greenstein, for example, and Richard Bernard from Palestine Action, just some of the few comrades who are being charged under terrorism legislation. So we're starting today, before we come to Deepa Driver, we're starting today with a short book review by Comrade Muzuna Rahman, who unfortunately cannot be with us today because he's working. But we've recorded the review, and I'm going to share it now quickly. And I'm hoping very much that we can do this more often. He's very good. Over. There you go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Just as an introduction, my name is Mizno Rahman, aka Mizan, and I'm a socialist activist and a comrade from Harrow. I've been involved in campaigning, especially for Palestine, most of my adult life. And also, I was a victim of the Labour witch hunt in regards to the witch hunt anti-Semitism crisis. So I was a victim of that. And yeah, so I'd just like to thank Tina for inviting me to take part in this way. I love books. And I'm always constantly posting about the books that I read. So basically, I love reading political left-wing kind of angle type books. So this will hopefully be the first of many videos of this kind, where I kind of do a short book review for. And the first book that I would like to go over is called The Suspect: Counterterrorism, Islam and the National Security State by Dr. Rizwan Sabir. I hope you can see it here. And I believe that this is a very good book to kind of start off with, as it is related to the issue of the war on terror and also covers how the UK's domestic counter-terror policies has had on the author's own mental health. So to start off with, who is the author? So, well, Dr. Rizwan Sabir is a lecturer in criminology at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK. He has briefed the Shadow Home Secretary on the Prevent Counter-Extremism strategy and has appeared widely on radio and mainstream media, including the BBC News and Sky News. However, Dr. Rizwan Sabir's profile became public, especially within the UK Muslim community, in 2008, when, as part of his PhD research on Muslim extremism groups, he downloaded what the US authorities called the Al-Qaeda training manual from a US government department website. He subsequently was arrested on terrorism offenses for downloading that manual. He was released due to wrongful arrest, but the book kind of goes into what happened, how it led to the arrest, what happened afterwards, and it goes into the document itself and the kind of mental health effects it has had on him. So even though Dr. Rizwan Sabir is an academic, the book is written in a non-academic style. It's written in a narrative form, and as you can, it's as if like you can hear him read it to you. So it's very, very well written, and it's very, very emotionally engaging. And he starts the book off by briefly writing about how he got into this field of study, why he wanted to get into the study of, why he wanted to become an academic, and also like why he wanted to find out and understand Muslim extremist groups, especially after 9/11 and 07/07. And this is why, as part of his study, he went onto a US government website and basically downloaded the Al-Qaeda training manual. And this resulted in his arrest and being held in custody. Now, the funny thing is, due to this experience, he decided to change his thesis and decided to critically take a look at UK government counter-extremism policy, aka the prevent strategy. So in a way, the police kind of helped create a critic. And after being released due to wrongful arrest, Dr. Sabir then goes into what happened afterwards to him, including being routinely stopped and searched by police, always stopped in airports due to Schedule 7 powers, being followed by the police, and also he describes an attempt by the police to recruit him. This has all had a negative effect on his mental health, and he sought mental health support as well. And this is, I thought, it was very, very important, because not many people, when you talk about what counterterrorism policies, how they affect people, they don't really go into mental health, but he goes into how this negatively affected his mental health, and also how it strained his relationship with families and friends as well. But I think it's also very important to briefly describe what he wrote about the document that he downloaded. And so in regards to the document, he wrote, quote, "But the document has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, other than the title that it was given by US prosecutors. In fact, the document is nothing more than a compilation of material drawn from various military intelligence and enforcement manuals," end quote. So it's not a tactical manual connected to Al-Qaeda. So, and this happened in 2008, but I think it's very important to bring it up right now, because if you recall, during last year's race riots, those riots happened because of the murders that took place in Southport. Now, Merseyside police tried to connect the Southport murderer with Muslim extremism and terrorism by saying that the murderer had in his possession an Al-Qaeda training manual. They were actually referring to the same manual, the same document that Dr. Rizwan Sabir downloaded in 2008. So it kind of seems as though the police refused to have learnt the lessons from Dr. Sabir's case, because after being arrested and being released, he took the police to court and he won his case for wrongful arrest. Now, he writes a little bit more about the document and why he believes the authorities, the United States government mainly, changed the name of the document. And he goes by saying that the actual document is called Military Studies in the Jihad Against Tyrants. That's the actual name of the document. But the US government changed the name to the Al-Qaeda Training Manual. And he writes, quote, "They did this, quote, as a way of connecting those who were found in possession of it to Al-Qaeda. And if the need arose, to increase the likelihood that people in possession of it in the future would have a higher chance of being successfully prosecuted in the courts." So basically what he's saying is that basically people who have this document, which is not a tactical document, it's not an Al-Qaeda document. In fact, it's a collection of different articles, of different manuals from different law enforcement agencies. That's what it is. It's not like an Al-Qaeda training manual. But he's saying that if people have this with them, which they can buy from WH Smith, they can buy this from all other kind of major retailers. If they have this in their possession, they can also be connected to Al-Qaeda, and therefore they can be prosecuted in court. That's the reason, that's his own reasoning, but that's why he believes that the US government decided to change the name of that document and, kind of allow that document to be downloaded. So basically the suspect, Counterterrorism, Islam and the National Security State, is a very, very important book for all those who want to understand the PREVENT strategy, the government's counterterrorism strategy, which he kind of describes as a counter-subversion strategy. So he believes that the PREVENT strategy goes in line with the government's counter-subversion strategy of basically policing kind of colonial, policing kind of people from abroad. The government, as part of the British Empire, had its colonies, and they used to basically police them and obviously oppress them. And people from within those colonies who used to resist that, they were basically targeted with the government's counter-subversion strategy. He believes that the counter-terrorism strategy, the PREVENT strategy, is part and parcel of that same framework to use against the Muslim community within its own borders. So basically, for me, it's a very recommended read for all those who want to understand the UK government's counter-terrorism/extremism policy and how the policy fits into the broader picture of counter-subversion by the UK government. And also it goes into the author's own negative mental health effects, how it strained his relationships with some of his friends and what he did to basically help himself. So the book can be bought in all major retailers. But I would suggest buying it directly from the publisher, Pluto Press, and also avoid Amazon at all costs. Do not buy from Amazon. Buy it from your local bookstores, but if you can, buy it from Pluto Press directly. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much, comrade. He's not with us, unfortunately, and I'm just waiting for Deepa. She was running tiny bit late, but she will be here in a minute, and she's asked me to show a video to do with Guantanamo, which I will do in a second. But I'm hoping very much that the comrade Mizano will join us with some other book reviews, because I thought that was quite useful. He reads an awful lot. He gets through a book in a couple of days, and he really keeps track of all of those. And with that book, I think it sounds quite fascinating that they tried to recruit him. You're a terrorist, but you can do some work for the state, etc. And he said, no, thank you. But also, that training manual of Al-Qaeda, nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. He downloaded it from the government website, and they still got him for it. Outrageous. But, that's the kind of tricks they're using, and they're using tricks against the Palestine protesters more and more as well, of course. Depending on what you say exactly, you're not a terrorist. It's just you are showing solidarity with those who are suffering from imperialism's reach. Okay, so I'll quickly show the video then that Comrade Deepa sent me, and I'm hoping that it's only a short one, but it's about Guantanamo. Let me just find it. Okay, here. I think there might be an advert first, sorry.
And you don't understand anything of what's written there, and you don't care about the situation, then
there you go.
هذه ما هي يدي، وهذا ما هو صوتي، بس هذه كلماتي. حاولت استخدم أي شيء حولي، خيط أسنان، حوائد خشبية، خرزات مسبحة. ما كانت عندي المواد اللي أحتاجها، فاستخدمت اللي موجود. كنت أطلب المعتقلين الثانيين يعطوني شوية من أغراضهم عشان أفككها. بالحبال مثلا استخدمت خيوط قميصي وكوفيتي. للحبال الأعرض استخدمت غزل ممسحة الأرض. وللمرساة ما لقيت العدة المناسبة، فاستخدمت غطا بلاستيك.
Oh, sorry, it appears that the video is not showing. That's a shame. I'm not quite sure what the issue is. I think it's because it's directly from YouTube. I'm hoping no, Deepa is not quite here yet, but I might just tell you a little bit about Mizuno said a bit more about talked a bit more about the suspect and how they tried to recruit him. They sent somebody after him at a conference and had a nice chit chat about what's going on, and what do you think about this, what do you think about that, etc., etc. And the longer it went on, the more it transpired that actually the guy was saying, don't think you'd be joining the police and the Secret Service. You could make such an impact, and you could make such a difference to our fight against terrorism and for a better world, and you could fight for Palestine, etc., etc. But the guy quite rightly said, no, thank you. And I can see Comrade Deepa has joined us, so I can stop waffling. Sorry, Deepa, I tried to show that video, but for some reason, because I think it's on YouTube, it's not showing, it wasn't sharing. I would have to download it first. And we didn't have time to download it, but I believe it shows a survivor from Guantanamo explaining how he used all sorts of bits and bobs to build himself a ship, a little ship in Guantanamo, and used, you know, bits of rope, bits of crap that you found around to basically not go totally mad. So it's important to talk about Guantanamo. Thank you for joining us, Deepa, who's Deepa Driver, is a member of the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. And of course, she was one of the key people campaigning tirelessly for the release of Julian Assange. Guantanamo was in the news recently, because it's been quite quiet around it for quite some time, and that suits, of course, U.S. imperialism quite well. But they have recently transferred 11 Yemeni men to Oman last week, who've been held there for 21 years without charge. But there's still 15 people in Guantanamo now. And of course, there were over 800 at its peak. And Deepa knows a lot about the subject. So thank you very much for joining us, Deepa. And yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Tina. Just so you know, in the chat, I've just sent you a better link to that, which is not on YouTube. So I don't know if it'll work. It is really a remarkable video and something worth watching. So if you can see if it works for you, but if it doesn't, don't worry.
I'll try and download it while you speak then.
I think this may not need to be downloaded. Hopefully it will play, but fingers crossed. But anyway, thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you. I'm very grateful for the work that activists like you do, because it is thanks to you that we have some semblance of hope in a society where everything seems to be crumbling around us. And there is no real left anymore. It is difficult to find spaces where you can talk about issues of this nature with anything more than a superficial understanding. So I'm so grateful to Tina for inviting me and to you all for allowing me to speak. I'd like to start off with this video, if it works, and if it doesn't work, then I start off with what I was going to say. Tina, there's a link. I've sent it to you as a direct message in the webinar chat.
Sorry, yeah, let's try it. If comrades could let me know if it works.
I can see it working. You might need to put the volume on again.
هذه ما يدري.
So I've got it very loud. You couldn't hear the music then, is it? Because I've got the music very loud, but it's not, I think it's probably not coming through. But it's in Islamic anyway, so you have to read the subtitles.
Yeah, in Arabic, yeah.
Yeah, in Arabic. So you don't, it doesn't matter if you are presumably.
Yeah, you might want to move. I might switch the spotlight off, so then people might be able to see the whole of your screen. Right now, it's a smaller screen.
Okay, I'll stop our videos. Okay.
هذا ما هو صوتي، بس هذه كلماتي. حاولت استخدم اي شيء حولي، خيط اسنان، حوائج خشبية، فرزات مسبحة. ما كانت عندي المواد اللي احتاجها، فاستخدمت اللي موجود. كنت اطلب المعتقلين الثانيين يعطوني شوية من اغراضهم عشان افككها. للحبال مثلا استخدمت خيوط قميصي وكوفيتي. للحبال الأعرض استخدمت غزل ممسحة الأرض. وللمرساة ما لقيت العدة المناسبة، فاستخدمت غطا بلاستيك. لما بديت أصنع هذه الأعمال صاروا المعتقلين الثانيين يحبوا يزوروني. لما شافوا الجندولة والسفينة العملاقة عجبتهم، ما كانوا مصدقين اللي شايفينه. حتى العساكر كانوا متفاجئين إني قدرت أعمل شيء من ولا شيء. انبسطت لما قالوا لي إن أعمالي بتنعرض في معارض فنية. أبغى الناس تعرف إننا نقدر نصنع أشياء حلوة وجميلة حتى لو كنا في مكان زي غوانتانامو. لما أبدأ عمل فني أنسى إني في السجن. بالغلط طاحت بعض الألوان الزيتية على سجادة صلاة. في اللي أخذ مني شهر ونص وفي اللي أخذ شهرين. أحيانا أواصل 48 ساعة وأنا بشتغل، أخذ بعدها غفوة سريعة وأرجع أكمل شغل. لما أبدأ شغل على عمل جديد ما في شيء يوقفني. ما أحب أماطل. أجنحة النسر رمز للطيران، والطيران يعني حرية. اخترت أجنحة النسر لسبب معين. لما كنت بالمعسكر الخامس طلعت من الشباك الصغير وشفت لي نسر يطير. طول حياتي تمنيت إني أقدر أطير، إني أكون نسر. حتى وأنا صغير كنت أقول لإخواني يا ريت عندي أجنحة. ربيت في السعودية، ورا الشبابيك الصغيرة تقدر تشوف صور للحرم والمسجد النبوي والمسجد الأقصى، بس ما تقدر تشوفها لين ما تطالع زي الناس. صنعت الأشرعة وربطت الحبال، حسيت نفسي وسط البحر. حسيت الأمواج تضرب السفينة توديها يمين وشمال. كنت حاسس إني بنقذ نفسي. بعد فترة إدارة السجن قررت تمنع خروج مجسماتي منه. رغم عشقي لبناء السفن حرموني من سعادة مشاركتها مع الناس. أتمنى فعلا بعد ما أخرج من المعتقل إني أصنع أعمال فنية أضخم وأحلى. أعرف إني أقدر أعمل حاجات جبارة، لكن لين الله يفرج همي هذه أعمالي بين يدكم. شاركها معكم بهذا الفيلم. في رضاك في رضاك كل آلام السجون، كل ما فيها يهون. كل آلام السجون كل ما فيها يهون. في رضاك في رضاك بغية العليم، منية الكليم أن يرى جنة.
Wow. Sorry, let me just stop share there. Oh, we've got it. Wow. That's very moving, isn't it? Incredible. And he's still in Guantanamo, is he?
No, he's not. He was among the 11 men that you just said have been moved to Qatar. Um, no, Oman, sorry, beg your pardon. I don't know. Got the countries mixed up. So is it okay if I start or?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
thank you. So one of the things that is worth starting this discussion with is that we cannot see Guantanamo in isolation. And it's really important to remember what has happened before it. Um, the the broader context of the Islamophobic attacks that took place in the aftermath of 9/11 globally, in terms of the increase in security, whether it is at airports, whether there is more identification of Muslim people in various situations, whether there is greater distrust of them, and all fueled by a narrative which created a situation where it was possible to label any individual the worst of the worst and drop them in a hole where they had no access to justice. And that's what Guantanamo really was about. It was about the culmination of a culture of serious Islamophobia. Islamophobia actually arising not from 9/11, of course, was a catalyst, but arising more from several decades of wars in different parts, either of the Middle East or in predominantly Muslim countries. Wars in which America was engaging in really quite nasty efforts to undermine Russia, for example, in Afghanistan. America was there before the Russians, as Jeffrey Sachs has pointed out, and this hunger for resource control, and therefore this, I guess, in some ways similar to what happened on the 7th of October, in that people reacted in a certain way as a reaction to something they had experienced and their desire to retake control. This is not an excuse for either of those events in any way, but it's just the context that creates a dynamic explosion where if you're bombing people's homes, if you're destroying people's lives, if you're making civilians' lives completely unbearable, then people find an outlet through extreme violence. And it's that extreme violence which culminated in what was 9/11. And as a result of 9/11, you then have these Islamophobic measures being introduced all over the world. And part of that Islamophobic venture was this desire to root out the so-called terrorists. And in doing so, what the United States did was set the precedent for completely undermining law, either domestic law or international law. And by that I mean many of the men who were captured were sold for bounties by, for example, your neighbor thinks he's having a boundary dispute with you. He has a position where he can say, nudge somebody quietly and say, hey, this guy could be working for Al Qaeda, and the US swoop in, pick you up, say in Pakistan or Afghanistan or in other countries. There is no local process to, even find if you're guilty. And people were handed over to the Americans, and they were then taken to black sites. Let me just dwell a little bit on this process of capture, and I want to tell you about the capture of my friend Mohamedou Ould-Slahi. Mohamedou's story has been memorialized in a film called The Mauritanian. It was with Tahar Rahim, Jodie Foster, Benedict Cumberbatch, and it was quite a big Hollywood film. I think it came out in around 2020, something like that. And it shows you how Mohamedou is this young man who is initially working in Afghanistan. He goes to Afghanistan to serve on the American side, in effect, with people who are supporting the Americans against the Russians in Afghanistan. And then he comes back, disillusioned, gets back to a normal life, then finds that he is being surveilled. He finds that he is he gets called by his cousin's husband, I think, or a relative. And the phone call which came to him appears to be from a phone that is linked to Osama bin Laden. And that's it. That's all it took. That one phone call from a phone that was a satellite phone connected to Osama bin Laden. And Mohamedou was the local police. I won't tell Mohamedou's story in any detail because I'm sure one day you will invite him to tell you his story himself. But he goes from the West, where he's staying in Canada, despite many worries, he decides to go back to Mauritania because the local police put pressure on his mother to tell him she is sick and get him to come back. And when he goes back, he is arrested. And that's the last. He talks about this one moment where he looked in the rear view mirror of the car and he saw his mother. And that was the last time he saw her. She died while he was in custody. So did his brother. And if you meet Mohamedou, my impression of Mohamedou when I first met him was, how can you be so tiny? And how did, he was quite a small built man, relatively small built, and he endured a huge amount of torture at Guantanamo. He was one of the first people to be on death row there. They saw him as somebody who would get the capital punishment. And they extracted a confession to him through torture. And the torture that Mohamedou suffered was not different from what many others suffered at Guantanamo. But what he experienced was extreme isolation. So he was, in the 14 years he was at Guantanamo, over 10 years, he was in complete solitary confinement, isolation. So it has really affected him. I see him as a human being now, as a friend, and I can see how it has a lasting impact on him. Similarly, there are many things that were done to the men. For some men, they were kept in small boxes in confined spaces where one particular individual had a phobia of insects, and insects were released into the box. Some were beaten, hung with what is called strapado, and hung up with the hands until your shoulders dislocate. Many were subject to extreme heat and extreme cold, very, very, very loud music, and sleep deprivation, food deprivation, sleep deprivation for days on end, extremely brutal punishment. And one of the ways in which this was done was through something called the Bybee Memo, where in the US, they made a difference. They created a memo which said there was a difference between inhumane degrading treatment and cruel inhumane degrading treatment and torture. And for it to be torture, and I'll read out the words, I always forget the exact words, so I've put them here. They must be of an intensity akin to that which accompanies serious physical injury, such as death or organ failure. So while you're being beaten, unless the level of pain is assessed to be that equivalent to death or organ failure, it was not considered torture. They introduced a lot of really bizarre things like rectal feeding of peanuts and pasta to a particular individual. They used to, when individuals decided to go on a hunger strike, they would stab a tube down their throat and put in liquid feed, which the person would then throw up. There was quite a lot of really behavior that you cannot understand how one human being can bring themselves to do it to another. Mohamedou, one of the things they preyed on was the religious convictions of the men. So initially, for a number of years, they would disrespect the Quran. The men were kept in, initially, of course, they were only given what is called an isofoam mattress, sorry. It's about that thick. And that was it. And a styrofoam cup. And if you wrote your name on it or any image on it, or tried to scratch an image on it, that was taken away as denial of privileges. You were given a single sheet, which was also taken away as denial of privileges. The one thing that some people were given was access to a Quran at one point. And if the soldiers would come in, if they thought you had maybe spoken to the person in the next cage or you had whispered something, they would come in and do a cell search. Or if even sometimes if for example, they had just taken you to torture, you had been brought back, dropped in your cage, and they wanted to continue to make you feel uneasy, uncomfortable, they would suddenly come in with these kinds of soldiers who you see at now what you see on the streets of New York or London when they're dealing with students in a big, well-armed police style with batons and whatever else. They would kick the Quran. They would on one occasion there was a major hunger strike because the Quran was put down the toilet. People were not even given things like a toothbrush. So that was a privilege that sometimes you had to earn. So it was a really horrific situation. And it was not just the situation itself, but also the process of rendition that from Afghanistan or Pakistan or wherever you were captured, where you were captured, you were stripped of your clothes, you were put into these other clothes, and you were handcuffed, you were shackled, put on a plane and treated essentially like cattle or the way we treat animals today, which is also actually cruel. And there was many of these people didn't understand the instructions that the Americans were shouting in English. And so they would be subject to even more beatings because the Americans were asking them to hold their head up or hold their head down and they weren't listening. When you were brought onto the base, you were taken through a medical check. And this medical check was about shaving all your private parts. And for some people, it involved giving various shots and medication. Many of these medications we later find out, through the history of Guantanamo, medication or deprivation of medications has also been used as a tool of torture. So sorry, it's a very, very depressing picture. But I also want to say that what was really quite worrying about Guantanamo was that Guantanamo was outside the law. And that means that US law didn't quite apply. And that's the reason Guantanamo was chosen, or at least it was asserted that US law didn't apply because this was not US territory. And it was a naval base that had been repurposed. And what they tried to say was these people did not have the constitutional protections that Americans have because they are not yet on American soil. And also they were treated as illegal enemy combatants. And the use of the term enemy combatant meant that because they were not treated like, for example, there are rules for prisoners of war in international law. And so international humanitarian law, which applies to prisoners of war, including, the way in which they must be treated, what their conditions of confinement must be, etc., was supposed to not apply. And so you have a bunch of people, young people often, who were serving as soldiers there, brought onto this island, which is very hard to get onto, very hard to get out of because it's in Cuba. And when you come to it, you have to take these special flights, which only you have to have these security cleared flights, even now as a lawyer, if you want to go and see a client. And sometimes those flights don't fly. They decide whether you can come on and get off the base. So you have this bunch of really young 20, 22, 23-year-old soldiers who've been told that these men who are speaking this foreign language look very different from them, have play to the Islamophobic narrative of people like Rumsfeld and Cheney, who call the men at Guantanamo the worst at the worst. And when these men come in and they see these people who they see as people who have attacked Americans for no reason, then there is this extreme brutality that seems acceptable and normalized. And I think there is a great parallel between the brutality that is normalized there and the brutality we see in Palestine today. The other thing I wanted to say was that when, for example, my friend Sabri Al-Qureshi, I want to put this link in the chat. I've just put it in the chat. I know some of you won't be looking at it, but Tina is going to kindly circulate it for me. Sabri was taken to Guantanamo. He's a Saudi citizen, Saudi-born Yemeni citizen, and he was captured. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was in a place where there was a raid on the building, and they have just taken him. He had no connection whatsoever to Al-Qaeda, etc. And he spent 15 years at Guantanamo and was released without charge or trial. When Sabri was released, he wasn't released. He was dumped in Kazakhstan because the Americans said that there are certain countries which are designated as zones where you cannot release these terrorists to. So many of the countries which these so-called terrorists came from, Yemen, for example, were considered to be not within that arrangement with the US where these terrorists would be, the so-called terrorists would be monitored. So he then has spent another 10 years in Kazakhstan. 3 people like him who were released to Kazakhstan. In the first 10 years, he spent most of his time under house arrest. What's special about Sabri is, and I've thought about this a lot because you've got to be careful about saying that somebody has to be special in order not to be treated in this way. So for example, when I show you Muad's video, I think, hey, here's this amazing talent. And so, surely he shouldn't be at Guantanamo. But there were a lot of people who weren't, talented in any way, and they didn't deserve to be treated in this way either. Sabri was very, very badly tortured at Guantanamo. But while he was at Guantanamo, he discovered painting. So he would paint in the air without any paints. And when for a long time, they couldn't see the sea. They could hear the sea near them. So when they were taken to the wreck yard, he tells me that he used to try and if there was some hole in the plastic sheeting which covered the metal crisscross walls of the wreck yard, the recreation yard, he would try and look out and look at the sea. He would look at people. And the painting helped him in some ways to survive. And since then, he has painted about 3,500 paintings. But while he was at Guantanamo, one of the punishments he used to have was that they wouldn't allow him to paint, in addition to all the torture. And they would only give him one piece of paper in every allocated time period. So if he did a painting and he wanted to maybe make changes or do a different painting, he had to earn certain privileges in order to be given that. So imagine spending 15 years of your life in that situation where it's very easy to degenerate completely. And many of the men have had very serious mental health problems. They've also at Guantanamo, they introduced the technique of waterboarding, which many of you know, which is simulated drowning, where you pour water on a person and they are tied into place, and until they feel they are drowning, you continue to keep pouring water and then use that as a technique to extract information. But one of the prisoners was subjected to something called dry boarding, where you stuff rags down somebody's throat and simulate dry drowning. And what's really sad is that some of these prisoners, and there were 789 men who went through this, men and boys, were as young as 14. So when you think of some of these people, they were children when they were taken there. And some of them died there. For example, there's a beautiful film about another prisoner who died at the age of 17. But the United States has never acknowledged that he died. They said that the prisoners were taking by killing themselves, by committing suicide, for example, there were some prisoners who hanged themselves, that they were taking a kind of unilateral action against America, and so they were taking unilateral hostile action. So you commit suicide, and it's treated as unilateral hostile action on you. And I'm sharing all of this with you because I think it's really important to understand what's going on here. And then in this context, you have a lot of good people. For example, Captain James Yee, who was the Muslim pastor at the Guantanamo Bay prison, who went through this process of trying to get basic rights for the men, and then in the end, he himself was jailed in America and tried for the kind of crimes that the men were tried for, and he was exonerated. But you do see these sparks of humanity amongst people. But the reason Guantanamo was successful in achieving this absolutely outlawed kind of torture was because professionals, whether in the United States or medical professionals, legal professionals, those who see themselves as professionals in the defense, all choose to use their professional skills to undermine the law, to undermine medical ethics, to undermine any code of honor and duty that people in the military so-called have. So it's doing a kind of degradation of the men, but it's also degrading anything that these people say they value. Many of these people consider themselves to be religious, and in undermining another Abrahamic faith, I think it's very interesting that they also undermined what they said they hold dear. One of the other challenges with Guantanamo is that people were not able to get a fair process. So firstly, they were never allowed to go through a fair process for the courts, not just when they were extracted, but once they got there. Many of them, as you will see, and this is really important that Chelsea Manning released these files, many people did not know that their friends, relatives were in Guantanamo. So you had this prison outside the law. The ICRC was allowed to visit after a while, but when the ICRC visited, some of these so-called forever prisoners were kept outside their view. So when the ICRC visited, they didn't even get to see these prisoners. So basic humanitarian law was not respected. Because you didn't know who was there, it was difficult to get legal representation for these men. So the families of these men couldn't get legal representation for the men to go through a legal process at Guantanamo. When the lawyers were engaging with these men, what was really interesting was the very basics of law were ignored. For example, people were sent in as lawyers when they were actually military personnel. People were sent in as interpreters who were interpreting something different from what the lawyers were saying. When lawyers went in, their privileged legal conversations with the detainees were spied upon. There was a creation of this idea that sometimes there was some information that even the lawyers could not see. So the dialogue would not be between a lawyer who's acting in your defense, but somebody often appointed by the state to act on your behalf who cannot even see what he or she is defending you against, and many of them are military lawyers. So if you are in this situation, nobody knows you're there, you're beyond the law, there is no hope of getting out, and journalistic integrity doesn't work because although journalists knew that there was this thing called Guantanamo, until whistleblower Chelsea Manning revealed the identities of the men at Guantanamo and the scale, the way in which they were abducted, where they were abducted, etc., and what was said about them, it was very difficult to get any process. So for years, people were left without any contact, without any meaningful relationship with their families. And when they've come out, many of these men have been dumped in countries like Kazakhstan for Sabri, where they've been dumped without any papers. The United States has not taken any responsibility, even when they've dumped them in a third country. And having dumped them in this third country, the person then stays in limbo. So they're still in Guantanamo while not in Guantanamo. And I think one of the things we have to think about is the role the United States plays and Britain plays. Britain, of course, was involved in some of these torture and rendition cases, and some of these rendition cases, as you probably know, happened through Uzbekistan, where people were, transited through other countries, Romania and others. Sorry, somebody's ringing the doorbell, and I'm hoping somebody will open it. Thank you. Um, and this tells you that it is not just the United States, but a lot of countries have had their, for example, Mauritania, which was Mohamedou's home country, have had their domestic laws subverted when they've had to hand over their own citizens to other countries, or when they've tortured and held secret black sites for people, whether in Algeria, whether in Syria, whether in Tunisia, where people have been tortured. Same in Afghanistan. I think we have to think a lot about the role that the United States plays in talking about international law all the time and then undermining it the world over, including on home soil. And what this does to create the environment for us as we live, because if we are supposedly allied to the United States, what this does in creating a context where the rest of the world really finds it very hard to tolerate us and recognizes when these people, for example, are released back, some of them make it back to their home countries, what kind of society we reveal ourselves to be, and how barbaric we reveal ourselves to be. And the fact that most people, you are 30 odd, very highly capable, good people who are interested in talking about Guantanamo. But most people have heard about, even if they've heard about Guantanamo, don't realize that it's still open, that there's about 15 men still there. And until 2 weeks ago, there were 30 men still at Guantanamo, 16 who had been cleared for release, and who had been cleared for release for over 5,000 days and yet not released because they couldn't be released back to their home country, and no other country was willing to take them. I've tried very much to cram quite a lot of information into a small presentation, so to speak, which is not just slides. But I'm sure many of you have read about this elsewhere and know much more about this. So please feel free to comment or ask questions. Is that okay, Tina, for time?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much. I mean, it was shocking. Well, not shocking. We kind of know about this stuff. We have heard about it. But it's certainly horrific to be reminded of it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Deepa. If anybody wants to ask questions or make a contribution, please click raise hand. I just want to ask you, in terms of, the own logic of the US government in doing this, even from their own logic, did it achieve anything at all? I mean, it was supposed to be a deterrent, I guess, but I mean, did it deter anybody? It's a bit like the war against Hamas. It's not, that's what it's been sold as, but it's not. Every Hamas fighter being killed by Israel is replaced by 10 more. What do you think was supposed to be the actual, what were they trying to achieve? They're not going to stop people, as you said at the beginning, they're not going to stop people fighting against oppression, do they? What is the logic of continuing to do that for them? I wonder.
So what is really interesting is that there are many people who have justified what Zionism does and has been doing to the Palestinian people for over 75 years, who were also involved in justifying Guantanamo. So this ticking time bomb scenario, what are you going to do if you have a busload full of children and you know there is a ticking time bomb, are you going to? And Alan Dershowitz, there's a very interesting chapter in a book called Bad Men, written by Clive Stafford Smith, where he talks about talking to Alan Dershowitz and trying to understand his point of view. And it soon becomes apparent that it doesn't really matter what the result is. So, for example, you know that you can obtain pretty much anything through torture. If you torture somebody, the information obtained, people will say what they think you want them to say in order for the torture to be over. So yeah, it didn't save American lives, or it didn't reveal anything. In fact, many people at Guantanamo ended up, so, for example, one of my contacts was told that his mother would be tortured in the next room. And then suddenly he heard a woman crying, and he thought it was his mother. And he agreed, he signed a confession that he had done certain crimes where he was not even in that country at the time. So another prisoner had menstrual blood spread upon him, supposedly. They said it was menstrual blood. And for him, as a devout Muslim, it was something that he couldn't bear. And he, the kinds of things that were done to people were such that people just wanted it to stop. And because they just wanted it to stop, they admitted to and agreed to, which led to years of false intelligence, years of people being kidnapped. And I want to tell you about a story which is not about this, which is the story of Khalid al-Masri. He's a German citizen of Lebanese descent. He was on holiday on the Macedonian border when he was abducted by 8 CIA agents, and he was brutally tortured. He was sodomized, he was tortured. And after 3 months, they realized that they had the real Khalid al-Masri already in custody. They decided not to release Mr. al-Masri because he's Muslim, he must be a bad man. And they continued to torture him for a further 3 months while they argued which team would take responsibility if they let him go. They then dumped him on the Albanian border in the middle of the night, and he thought he was going to be shot in the back of the head because it was the middle of the night. He was asked to get down from the car, and he thought he was going to be shot. The Albanian police guards, 2 Albanian policemen, picked him up, repatriated him to Germany, where, he was in a very awful mental health state by this time. And his family had left Germany because they thought he had abandoned them. And he tried to get justice. And the United States put a huge amount of pressure on the German government not to allow his case to go to court. And it was only at the European Court of Human Rights, using information obtained through WikiLeaks, that Mr. al-Masri was able to get a judgment in his favor. That judgment, of course, it was something better than nothing, but it still is nothing. There is no justice because the people who committed those crimes in America were never taken to task. And this happened time after time after time for so many people. Omar Khader, another child who was taken to Guantanamo, finally received compensation a few years ago, and he was tortured. And a British man lost the use of his eye as a result of somebody scooping out his eye while he was at Guantanamo. The loss that people have suffered, the loss in their relationships, the loss in their families, and the gain, when you weigh that up against the gain that America got, not just in resurging terror in these countries, because if you have a brother or a sister or a sibling who's gone through this process, you could either get scared or you could say, I have nothing left to lose. And we never know which way people go. I also think somebody had said in the chat, I was just quickly looking at it, it's also about this NATO kind of alliance that creates a context where if you have 3% or 4% of your GDP spent on defense spending, you then use those weapons and destroy these countries, which then creates the context for so-called terror. Because what we're doing every day is unleashing terror in the lives of civilians in these countries. I hope that answers the question. Sorry, I was a bit of a...
Yes, it certainly does. If anybody from the audience wants to ask a question, please go ahead. I mean, I've got loads of questions. I'll carry on for now until I see a hand up. Actually, there's Carol. Let's get on. But just one question though is about the question of legality, which I think is an interesting one and an important one. You are obviously from a legal profession. You're a member of the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. But law, I mean, bourgeois law, is being stretched, is being made to do the most unlawful, the most unjustifiable things. I mean, we're seeing Tony Greenstein, other, protesters, now Palestine Action protesters, being held for anti-terror legislation, that's within the law, and clearly they have nothing to do with terrorism. It's an absolute joke. They're calling for solidarity, or even in the case of Palestine Action, they've organized some direct action. Clearly, they're not terrorists in that sense. Is it? I mean, as a lawyer, you will have certain ideas that the law can be good, but I mean, is it, should we as socialists really rely on the law, and criticize those actions for being unlawful when clearly, the bourgeoisie will do with laws as they please? Should we just discard this idea that we will get justice through bourgeois laws? And it's not just, the lawyer with the deeper pockets, the side with the deeper pockets usually wins, but it's also these laws are being made and remade to keep things as they are, to keep those in power in power. Do you understand my question?
I do. I think if you look at the work of, say, somebody like Gareth Pierce, sometimes, so firstly, I recognize your point that if the people who are making the law, i.e. the politicians in the land, are paid for by lobbies, for example, the Zionist lobby, or indeed arms lobbies, or indeed pharma lobbies, the actions that they take are not in our interests, but in the interests of the 1%, the very rich and the very well-connected. That said, I think it's very easy when we're on the left, and in this, it's difficult to know what's the right answer here, but for me, I think it's very easy to get into this mindset that, hey, nothing we will do will work. We can't use the system, and we just have to give up, or we have to engage in complete anarchy for anything to happen. I think we are winning victories, whether it is, and often some of these victories are coming too late, but we are winning victories in small ways, whether it is the Assange victory of making sure that Julian is free, or whether it is other victories that we see every day when we see Palestine Action protesters not prosecuted. I think slowly we are, I think the other side is very clever. They put people in positions of power in the judiciary and elsewhere who are, you don't have to tell them that do it a certain way. They come from a class and a mindset where that seems normal and natural to them. So you don't even sometimes have to be corrupt enough to bribe them. They don't have to be corrupt enough that you bribe them. But I guess my own answer to this, and I guess many of my colleagues at the Holiday Inn see this, is they don't see the legal system as perfect. They don't see the legal system as working in our favor necessarily, but they do see places within the legal system where you can use the system to achieve your ends and to protect human rights. And I do think there are a good number of people out there, because we are the 99%, who actually somehow infiltrate the system and do brave things and take decisions which are in the interests of the people. I think right now we have really, through the use of the COVID-related fascistic measures, they have essentially allowed or normalized various things that maybe people would not have been so willing to take before. And the levels of surveillance, the levels of intrusion into privacy have gone up manyfold. But I think there is a real need for us to push back. And I think these things don't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of discussion and engagement and different people doing things different ways, because no one person has the right answer for change to happen. But I don't think that as a trade unionist and an activist, I can say, let's give up, because the system is so bad that you can say, oh, we give up and we roll over. And then if you don't do anything, then you're going to lose anyway. So you might as well do something.
I don't think we should give up. I just think, that there is often is a certain sense of, I think, an illusion in bourgeois law. I mean, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, for example, he was always suing this or that. George Galloway is suing magazines and this, and sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but it's not going to get you, justice. It's not going to get people to shut you up. We have to present our own agenda forcefully. That's a much better way, I think, to fight back, but in this case, of course, it's slightly different. There are attacks on the legal system in Britain, very much in the here and now. The jury system, I quite agree that we have to defend those gains. They are under attack for efficiency reasons. Officially, it's much faster. Of course, it's much faster if you don't have to bother with the jury. But this is hugely important that we defend jury service and the right to be judged by people like you and me, and not the bourgeois judge, etc. So that's an important fight. Okay, Carol. Quick.
Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry I was a bit late. I was on another meeting for a while. Deepa, thank you so much for everything that you continue to do and all you've done. I mean, without lawyers such as yourself and Gareth and all the Byman's teams and so on, I don't know where we'd be, because I've been supported through court cases where I could easily have ended up in prison, and the legal services are great. But what I wanted to say was about, I knew Mozambique, met Binyam Mohammed and a couple of other people, and were at the beginnings of Caged, and went to see Mosam on his book tour after he was released. And the one thing that I recall was Chris, who was a young prison guard who had to do a duty of watching over the men. And I put it in the chat, he was considered trailer trash from a poor American family. And his parents said, you either get a job now or you enlist. And he chose to enlist, thinking it would be exciting. And what he found was he was shipped off to Guantanamo Bay, didn't even know where it was. But when he got there, after a short period of time, what he found was this amazing situation where these men and boys would have call to prayer, where they would all pray at certain times, where they adhered to their religious beliefs, and where he was taken to a different level spiritually, emotionally, and so on, and started to become very aware that he didn't want to be part of this, but was also aware that to refuse to do things could have meant that he would have been imprisoned and taken through court martials and so on and so forth. But he made sure that when he came out of the army, he was then seeking Mosem to apologize for him, because I believe Mosem was leading a lot of the prayers. So that was just a thing that I know about. And I thought, there are probably some people who were involved in these tortures and these looking after, inverted commas, the prisoners, who actually had a change of belief and conscience and so on, due to the most horrendous things that they witnessed, but also some of the very beautiful collective conscious things they witnessed. One of the things that people don't usually talk about is women. And I'd like to know, I was following it for a while, and then it just sort of dropped off the mainstream a bit. And I tried to follow up and kept getting blanks. But what happened to Afia Siddiqui? Because her story is absolutely horrendous, a mother of 3. And I know we don't know whether her baby was murdered, but certainly her 2 children were kidnapped with her, then separated from her, and then just dumped outside her sister's home, bewildered and shocked. And there were stories, I think Binyam was saying that they were hearing women there, and also in these secret prisons that the Americans have got, that there were women, and but they didn't know what was happening to them. And I suspect very horrific things, but I've not been able to find anything for some time, over a few years, around Afia.
So can I just start with a small, small, I wouldn't say correction, but just
Oh,
to
right.
set, which is not about Afia or anything. Just, I am not a lawyer myself. I
Oh,
would very reluctant to. I think people, because I'm co-vice chair of the Haldane, they assume that I'm a lawyer, and it's a natural assumption if you're in a society of socialist lawyers that you might be a lawyer. So I'm just a trade unionist member. So I have always,
I should
when
know
I've
that,
done.
Deepa. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's just, and because I do regulatory stuff that's so close to law that people just kind of merge the two. But I just didn't want anybody to think I have the knowledge that a lawyer has. I don't. But just firstly about Afia, her sister and Clive Stafford Smith, who is her lawyer, have been doing an amazing campaign at the moment called Set Afia Free, I think it's called.
Oh.
I can when the next question is being asked, I'll post the link in the chat. And they are running a case. Afia's in an American prison now, and she's in a very, very precarious health state, is what I heard, but is slowly improving now that she has some contact with the outside world. When her sister first went to see her, she didn't recognize her. Afia's youngest child, we believe, is dead, but the other two are still alive. Um, and yes, I think Clive's been working very hard to mobilize the Pakistani government to stand up for its citizens. But oh yeah, this was the point I was trying to make, which is that what happened in Mauritania, what happened with Khalid El Masri in Germany, and you wouldn't see Germany as a backward nation there, where the laws are, it's a banana republic of some sort. You expect certain minimum standards within the German legal system, but even in Germany, and of course we know more about Germany in the last few months, but even in Germany, where these politicians supposedly have some strength, what the United States said went. So the United States said, don't persecute the CIA agents, and they didn't want to. They even spied on Merkel, and no, they didn't do anything about it. So I think you're right. It says a lot about the way in which what the United States is doing in undermining international law is also undermining domestic law in all these countries and in undermining democracy. Because every time Keir Starmer does something which is making us more and more complicit in the war crimes in Gaza, when virtually, I would say, 90% of the British public oppose the genocide, even if they think, oh, well, initially it was justified, nobody can look at those children now and say it's okay to do that. Keir Starmer is doing it entirely of his own will, just because he's beholden to NATO and the weapons sales and the lobbies. And this is something that is affecting not just those people in those third world countries, it's happening here. So I think it was very nice to hear from you, Carol, and thank you for sharing that about Muazzam. I heard a similar story about Mohamedou, and Muazzam once actually told us an interesting story once, where he was saying that he had invited his prison guard to come and stay with him, and when his prison guard stayed with him, he shut the door at night and said, "Well, for the first time, I will have the key, not you."
Yeah.
Something like
Yeah, I
that.
think that's true. I think that's true. And I have to say, Chris was a lovely young man. He said it damaged his soul and his heart and his whole being part of it. And he wanted to change his life to do good. So, I think him being completely forgiven by Mozam and some of the other former prisoners was essential in actually moving forward for all of them. Yeah.
Thanks,
Well,
Carol.
thanks for that. I will contact sign the petition and share it. Thanks a lot.
I put it in the chat. There is, of course, also the famous story or the famous fact of Nelson Mandela's jailer, who he became friends with, sort of, isn't it? It is something that either can make you into really, it can brutalize people as it does soldiers in war, etc. It can either, or it can often also lead to the opposite effect, though. Matthew.
Yeah, can you hear me? All right,
Yes.
yeah, mute's gone off, that's good. Okay, no, I mean, the thing is, obviously, what we're seeing, of course, is the whole structure being torn apart. I mean, the interesting thing, obviously, is, historically, of course, the imperialists always subcontracted the torture. So there were certain countries, including places like Syria, where they did, Morocco and so on, where they had torture done, and other places in Latin America and so on and so forth, who would do, but of course under supervision. I mean, obviously clearly controlled by whoever, either the US or the British or whoever else. But the difference, of course, is the move, with Bush and so on, and the disintegration of the system itself. He then says, okay, well, you can go and do your own torturing, which of course they took to with great enthusiasm, and then constructed all this, this huge network. I mean, now, of course, obviously, the interesting thing is that, the impact of Gaza has been absolutely massive. I mean, I think that the problem is what they've got is that the actual mechanisms of control of the imperialists are falling apart. So if you'd been like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the South Africans would not have taken that case to the ICJ. They wouldn't have had the nerve to do it. Obviously, the US has then said to if you follow the proceedings of US Congress, their first reaction was, because obviously the South Africans have a certain access to US markets and so on, and they said, well, why are we allowing these people who are obviously doing these terrible things like bringing this case to have access to our markets? We should cut them off now. And all of this, of course, could happen under Trump. So I mean, in those terms, it is going to get worse. I think that the other thing, of course, is that the move again, I mean, by the ICC, under extreme pressure. I mean, wouldn't have seen it 15 years ago. Wouldn't come close. But the fact that you have this visible genocide going on, visible to everybody. The fact that the Palestinian journalists have managed to put up, a documentation of a genocide for the first time, which is why Gaza is more significant than Iraq, because that didn't happen. I mean, obviously the death rate in Iraq was, in some cases, quite similar, but the point was that there wasn't that process of sticking up, huge amounts of stuff on social media showing people of the world what was going on. So in those terms, it's starting to peel the thing apart. But the thing is, obviously, what they're then doing, of course, is destroying their own system. That's the extraordinary thing. They built this system to control the world, for the US, and now they're tearing it apart. Which I mean is what Trump means. I mean, Trump means to destroy big chunks of that system, which in some ways is quite incredible, but in other ways is quite logical. So it's a very, very odd position, really. And as you say, the real problem, of course, is there isn't a left. Because nobody's posing an alternative. Nobody's posing an alternative to this crap.
Things can fall apart for a very long time if nothing is there to replace it. Absolutely. Do you want to say?
I just want to make one point, which is that, to me, there is no difference really between the Tories and Keir Starmer and between Biden and Trump, except that Biden is able to use good equalities language so I completely agree with you, Matthew, about the fact that there is no left. There is no credible left political alternative. And what I wanted to say was, okay, you can sit here and say, oh, there is no left and whatever. But I would urge that those of us who are able to, and there are of course limits to this, that we should really stop having these very petty, narrow-minded battles on the left. and constantly calling out people. Our job shouldn't just be about calling out people. We have to build. And we have become so used to calling out, and there is so much to call out, that all we do is call out. We don't actually do things that create joy, create inspiration, create things. And when we do those things, we are able to mobilize to victory. And I think that was what was, I mean, people may have their different views about Jeremy and his, whether he was good at this or whether he was bad at that. But one of the things that Jeremy did was his campaign inspired millions of people to believe that there is a better world possible. And I think we have a responsibility to do that. We have a responsibility to try and, in our own ways, stop finding fault with the left and just focus on what we want to achieve and focus on where we want to go. I don't know if that's that it's not an answer to a question, because yours was really more a comment, but I think it really resonated with me. Yeah.
Easier said than done, isn't it? I mean, Jeremy inspired, but he didn't organize, you know. We left in a worse state than when he came into office. If you look, you know, how we're organized, how things have fallen apart, etc. But that's a different discussion. Ken's got a question or a comment.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deepa, for reminding us of what happened at Guantanamo and what continues to happen there. My sort of observation, my question to you is actually more local and more immediate than Guantanamo. And do you think that the chatter is the wrong word, hysteria might be a better word, around the grooming gangs is going to be used as an excuse for fomenting Islamophobia? Because they have announced today that they're going to do inquiries based on culture and ethnicity behind the gangs. And to me, that sounds like code for inventing some excuse for Islamophobia, some other variety of racism around the gangs. And I'm not disputing that people of multiple ethnicities are involved in the gangs, but I think it may be used as a target and as a way to foment racism, Islamophobia. What's your own opinion on that front?
So firstly, I just wanted to remind everybody that it's 23 years since Guantanamo was opened this month. January 11th, I think was the date. And it's very timely that we're having this conversation. And you're right, Ken, when you look at the way in which a culture of fear and othering was done to Muslims in the war on terror and subsequently, and how that war on terror supposedly has actually undermined the rights of everybody else. If you went before the war on terror to an airport, the way you would be screened would be very different from the way in which you're screened today. And this is not happening just to Muslim people, it's happening to all of us. Similarly, the surveillance that is taking place is at a completely different level. And Muslims might be the scapegoat to start off the process, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, and then it's everybody else. So we must be worried about that. About the grooming gangs themselves, one of the things that has worried me for a long time is the way in which the left has failed to confront issues because of so-called issues with equality. So if you look at some of the data, and I am not an expert on the grooming gang, so I'm very reluctant to comment beyond my expertise. So I'll keep this brief. One of the reasons why certain issues were not confronted when they should have been was because of worries that people might be termed Islamophobic. And you see the same narrative which they find with anti-Semitism or other equalities kind of veneers put to things to which prevent people from confronting crime. That said, pedophilia and the exploitation of young people is not restricted by religion. I think if you create a society in which children are kept in children's homes without proper care, without proper oversight, without proper safety, when they have access to drugs and drink, and when they're leaving these children's homes, nobody's looking after them, then we are creating a situation where people of different persuasions can exploit them. And I think if we tackle those problems, I think we should be tackling those problems. I think this government is a focus group government. They try and say things that will allow them to hold on to the vestiges of power that they have. I don't think they're doing it because they care about the people. So, Suella Braverman, who talks about dreaming of sending people to Rwanda, when she, and as a Tory, when they talk about, oh, we care about racism, or we care about the safety of young girls, oh, we care about the safety of these poor children, they don't actually care about poor people at all. So, yeah, I'll stop there because this is just uninformed based on and limited comment based on what little I know. But yeah, I can see the seeds of Islamophobia there and the fear that all Muslim men are somehow out to get you.
That's certainly what the Tory graph and the Express are trying to show with that campaign. And it's, of course, it is a campaign against the Labour government. I mean, you said there's no difference between them, and it's very hard to find differences. But they do want, some people want to get the Tories back, and that's, I think, is the main target of that.
I think in some ways, for me, when we came to this election, much as I despised the Tories, I thought Starmer was worse. Because what Starmer is doing now is ensuring that no left government can ever come into power for at least another generation. Because people will say, hey, you had a left government and here is what you got. So, yeah.
Yep, some Corbyn supporters supported Starmer, didn't they? That was shocking. Anyway, we're not going to talk about Corbyn anymore because we'll disagree on that. Malcolm, hi.
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you, Deepa, very much for that. I mean, very unpleasant to listen to, I must say. And I guess I knew most of it in inverted commas, but it's horrific. I mean, I don't know what happens to a country like America when they have those things going on. And most people in America vaguely know of Guantanamo Bay. But I didn't want to talk about that at all. I wanted to talk about something called Rojava. And people have all this sort of despair on the left, and I guess I'm included in that and have been for most of my life. But I discovered quite recently something called Rojava, which is also known as the anonymous. Oh God.
The autonomous region?
Autonomous region of northeast Syria. And it's a very strange story. I knew nothing about it. Most people living in that area are Kurds, and they fought ISIL, and the Americans supported them. And so in this country, if it is a country, what I found most interesting was the region has a co-governance policy in which every position in government in the region includes a female equivalent of equal authority to a male. So the whole society, they have a militia, which apparently is very effective, though they haven't got heavy weapons. But it's sort of a man-woman militia. The women carry guns, machine guns, they drive tanks. And so the whole area, which is northeast Syria, and I only found this recently, and it seemed like a funny little flickering hope because it's secular. It's secular, for goodness sake, in the middle of Syria. They're currently under, the Americans support them because they fought ISIL. And the Turks hate them because they're Kurds, and the Turks seem to have an irrational hatred of the Kurds. But I was just wanted to make people aware of this place and try and be interested in it, because it does seem a little tiny, weeny, teeny glimpse of hope on the horizon. Of course, it's now Syria has gone into another. I mean, I'm not an expert on Syria at all, but it's gone into another sort of mess, I suppose. Everybody's saying, well, how can somebody who was a Al-Qaeda man suddenly now become a statesman and include everybody? But I would encourage people to just Google Rojava. There's a lot on it if you don't know about it, and I didn't. And that's all I wanted to say. So there are glimpses of hope, a little tiny glimpse of hope. If you speak Kurdish, that is, or Arabic, or.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay.
It's probably going to be crushed before long.
Well, I don't know whether you know about it or not, but they're not very easily crushed because they've got I mean, yes and no to that is. It depends on America, because America has been supporting them, and of course, America, as we know, is sort of the great evil. So they were supporting them. They gave them air cover and weapons and ammunition because they were fighting ISIL very successfully. And they still are, and the Americans still need them because extraordinarily in the vast Syrian desert, which I once flew over several hours years ago, there are pockets of ISIL, and the people in Rojava, or the Democratic Federation of North Syria, is what they sometimes call it. They're not entirely sure. They haven't got sleepers amongst them who are ISIL sleepers, of course. But the Americans are still against ISIL, so presumably they're still in favor of Rojava. But they are in NATO with Turkey, and Turkey hates Rojava because they're Kurds. And as far as I can make out, somebody on the call might know much more about it than me, which wouldn't be difficult, is the Turks hate the Kurds because the Kurds won't say they're Turks, because the Turks call them mountain Turks, and the Kurds say, no, we're not Turks. Anyway, slightly off topic, but
I mean, certainly interesting. Syria is now, a third of Syria or something is led by a terrorist, who until recently and still is on the British terrorist list. It's the question of, one day you're a terrorist, the next day you're a freedom fighter, or the bourgeois politician's latest toy. So, Deepa, perhaps in summing up, you could reply to some of those questions, but also get back to the issue of Guantanamo. We have no comrades with their hands up, so over to you.
I just wanted to invite you all, firstly, to an event which is taking place in Paris between the 23rd and the 26th of January. It's an exhibition of the art of my friend Sabri Al-Qureshi, the one I told you who spent 15 years at Guantanamo and the last 10 years at Kazakhstan. His art has been shown at exhibitions around the world, but he's never been able to travel to it. And we are trying to find a way for him to come, but it won't be in time for Paris, I suspect. It's really important because this is the first time many of those paintings are being seen outside Guantanamo and outside the US. And they are absolutely stunning. Tina, if you wouldn't mind circulating the link, that would be really helpful. And within it also, there will be on the 25th, a discussion with Mohamedou Ould-Slahi about his book and his writing and his work as an artist and a poet. So firstly, on a positive note, I wanted to say that. In terms of my commentary, just to go back to the point about the left being obsessed with some of these terms about, oh no, I have to seem like I support equality, so I have to support Kamala Harris, or I have to believe that support women, so I have to support Jess Phillips. Whatever, these kinds of using these labels to essentially undermine the rights of Black people and women, and it doesn't work. It's not okay to be bombed by Black men or by white women. It's still a bomb. So I just wanted to say that we need to get much more careful on the left about allowing our commitment for these kinds of things like equalities or fair treatment to be misused by because the right has become very good at using our language and using it against us and making us feel ashamed to say, oh no, we don't support X or we don't support Y. And that's one thing that I think we need to be careful of. I think the second thing we need to be careful of course, was the splintering that I was talking about, because there is this desire for purity and this lack, I guess I have found it in myself, which is this lack of recognition that people might be good on 3 issues out of 5 and they're still okay to talk to. I found it difficult sometimes to engage with some people because I just think, oh, it's terrible. But I think we have to find some space to be able to do that if we want to build again and get more people on to us. I think the other thing which I'm concerned about is there's a lot of discussion about Trump and the rise of the far right and the discussion around reform. And I think that discussion is fueled by having an economic system where people are really struggling. And the left, in talking about all these other things, equalities, rights, whatever else, has forgotten to talk about pay and pensions and those kinds of things that make working people's lives better. And we have to get better at that. And we really have to stop talking in our little narrow niches and start talking to people, working people outside our circles, to make them, because a lot of people who are supporting reform or Farage or Trump are people who are disillusioned with the way the system works, and then they go for these so-called radicals because they think they will get things done. And actually it's because we are not presenting an alternative, and I think we need to work harder at doing that. So those were my broad comments about Guantanamo. I would urge you to continue to pay attention to the 15 men who are still at Guantanamo, 3 of whom are cleared for release, 3 of whom are going through what is called a periodic review board. So there's 6 people who could potentially be out, and must continue to put pressure. There is a group called Close Guantanamo, which meets, and they were on the 11th of January, they were on Trafalgar Square. And I think it'd be nice if those of you who are so aware of these things can occasionally drop in and give them some solidarity and engage with them. And also, I think we have to support organizations like Big Brother Watch, who are doing work against the kind of intrusive surveillance, including facial recognition, that's even making its way onto our high streets. I think these guys, and of course the broader Islamophobia, I think we have to become much more willing to challenge the Islamophobia that we see around us, and that's how we ensure another Guantanamo doesn't happen. Unfortunately, British prisons are places where our prisoners many of them are care leavers, and many of them are people who have been failed by the system. And I think we can agitate about Guantanamo and talk about it and think about it and understand it, but we also have to deal with the Guantanamos here. So if you have the time and energy, please support prisoners at your local prison in some way. Maybe you're not physically able to go there. Maybe you can donate a book or to the prison library or things like that, small things that you're able to do to oppose the privatization of prisons, the privatization of hospitals, the privatization of the care system, which is what is inbuilt in creating the kind of mini Guantanamos we see all around Britain, and of course opposing the laws that that allow more and more for governments to pretend on the grounds of our security and our safety to undermine the rights of others.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deepa. The war on terror, and especially the war on terror, if it's used against Palestine solidarity, is a war on all of us. That's what they are doing, isn't it? I totally agree with you there. Slight differences on terms of how to build an alternative, but again, we don't need to get into that. But it's, we're called Why Marx because we believe, you have to. It's not good enough to just put us all in the same room and we'll happily build something together. The question is, what are we going to build? What program? What are we fighting for? What is the alternative? There'd be lots of people who still think the Labour Party can bring socialism eventually, or maybe Jeremy Corbyn's going to bring socialism. No, we have to do it. We have to get organized. We have to fight. We have to organize on every level, top to bottom, take every issue seriously. And it's wonderful to see taking this issue seriously, because it's one of the many fights we have to get involved in and get organized in. Hopefully, comrades are going to the Palestine solidarity demonstration this weekend and next week. Sorry, we're having a discussion on. I'm putting in a chat now. Communist Culture Club again with Malcolm Millers on people, architecture, urbanism, and politicians. That should be an interesting session. Thank you very much, comrades. Thank you very much, Deepa, for coming on the show.